everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I thought it would be fun to talk about all of the series that I read in 2019 and to kind of give you guys general reviews of all of these series as a whole. Also, just to let you guys know, I am not going to be including series that I read that are not completed yet. And then one of these series I actually started in 2018, but read the other two books in 2019. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So the first series I want to talk about is Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. This is one that you guys have heard me talk about a lot recently because I just finished Five Dark Fates, which is the fourth and final book in December. So this takes place on an island called Fenburn, and we follow three triplets whose names are Mirabella, Arsinoe, and Katarine. And basically on this island, every queen births a set of triplets. That's just how it has always been. And those triplets grow up to one day basically compete to be the one true queen, and one of them has to kill the other two off in order for that to happen. So this is definitely a darker YA fantasy. I love the atmosphere of Fenburn for sure. It definitely gives me autumnal slash wintry vibes. It's also just a very unique premise in my opinion, and the characters were very compelling. I will say this first book, Three Dark Crowns, I didn't love all that much. I gave this one 3 stars because it was really slow paced, but starting with the second installment, which is called One Dark Throne, I thought that the series improved a lot from then on. So I definitely do overall recommend this series, and I think I would give the series as a whole like a 4-star rating. So yeah, if you're just looking for a YA fantasy that is darker and just a little bit different from what you typically read, then I would for sure recommend this series. The next series that I read is a trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. This is the Shadow and Bone trilogy, or the Grisha trilogy. This is one that I read in the earlier part of 2019, so I feel like I haven't talked about this series in a while, except I did cover the third and final book called Ruin and Rising in my worst books of 2019 video. I will link that in the cards above. But basically this is a series all about this girl Alina, and it takes place in this universe that has a very interesting magic system. It's also like a Russian inspired fantasy world, which you don't typically see in fantasy novels in general. Usually they're more like European based, but I liked that this one was Russian based. And she becomes known as the Sun Summoner because she has this ability to summon beams of light, which is really helpful in this world because there is something called the Shadow Fold in the middle of their land, and in this sort of void there's these really scary monsters and it's pitch dark, and so she uses her ability to kind of cut through the Shadow Fold. And there's a lot of different things going on in this series. I really loved this first book, Shadow and Bone. I gave it 4 stars. For me, the series did go downhill as we went along. I think I gave Siege and Storm like 3 or 3.5 stars, and then like I said, Ruin and Rising I did not love. I gave that one 2 stars, but I will say I liked how the series overall ended, and I am just really looking forward to reading the other books in this same universe. There is the Six of Crows duology, and then the King of Scars, which is going to be another duology. I think I just heard amazing things about those books in particular, and I think it's kind of universally agreed upon that this is not the best YA fantasy series out there. Would I recommend this? Maybe. I will say it gives a really good introduction to the world of the Grishaverse, and I did enjoy most of the characters, especially Nikolai and the Darkling, who is the main villain of the series. I've also heard that you can just go straight into the Six of Crows duology and you don't even need to read this, so maybe try that series first, and then if you love that and you want more from this universe, maybe go into this series after that. Next trilogy I read after that is the Legend trilogy by Marie Lu. I finally read this. I literally had this first book, Legend, on my shelves for like 5 years before I finally picked it up. I listened to all of these on audiobook. I found them on Hoopla, and I really enjoyed that format. So this is basically a dystopian series that came out in the era of Hunger Games and Divergent and things like that. This is a very interesting premise though. Basically, this is taking place far into the future, and the United States has split up into two very different countries. And so the two main characters, June and Day, live in the Republic of America, and I think they live around like the Los Angeles area. And so because this takes place really far into the future, I really liked that Marie Lu used the idea of global warming in that sea levels have been rising exponentially, and so at this point the United States is reduced to like half of its size, I think, and it's interesting to hear about how the sea levels have affected the world in general. But basically June, who is our main female character, she is like the prodigy of like, I think her military academy. I think that's where she is at the beginning of this book. And Day has been wronged by the government of the Republic over and over and over again, and so he just decided to become a rebel and do what he needs to do to kind of get justice in this dystopian society. And basically these two characters end up meeting when Day is accused of killing June's brother. And this was an overall like okay series. I think overall I would give this like a 3.5 stars. It wasn't anything that blew me away. I probably would have enjoyed it more if I read it back when this came out, back in like 2014. I know my main gripe with this series is that, especially in this first book, June and Day fall in love pretty instantly. It's definitely an insta-love situation, and that was very annoying. But other than that, it's not anything particularly all that unique. Although I will say, if you just love dystopian, I would say check this out, because I do think that there are very interesting things going on in this world that Marie Lu created. The next series that I read the entirety of is Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. This is kind of one of those classic YA paranormal vampire romance series. This definitely was inspired by the whole Twilight saga that just took over the whole YA genre back in like 2005. I think this first book came out in like 2007, I believe. And this is a really interesting premise. Basically, this centers around these two main characters, Lissa and Rose, and there are essentially three different types of vampiric kind of creatures in this world. So first we have the Moroi vampires, which are like the good vampires. They live very docile lives. Most of them are very privileged. They also have the ability to kind of hone other magical abilities besides being a vampire. So Vampire Academy is where these young Moroi vampires go to learn to hone their craft and things like that. Then we have the Strigoi, which are the bad vampires. These are essentially undead, kind of zombie-like vampires. Basically, a Moroi can turn into a Strigoi in this world by either committing a murder or being converted by another Strigoi vampire. And once you become Strigoi, you pretty much have no soul. You're just like a killing machine. And so the Strigoi are definitely the main threat throughout this whole series. And then we have Dampirs or Dompirs, who are half Moroi and half human, so they're kind of hybrids. And Rose, who is our main character, is a Dhampir. And basically in this society, Dhampirs are like kind of supercharged humans. So Dhampirs mainly become bodyguards for these Moroi vampires because Morois are kind of helpless. They don't like to fight. They don't want to learn how to fight. And so the Dhampirs have to protect them, because also Morois are kind of an endangered species among vampires. It seems like Strigoi are definitely kind of taking over. So I definitely really enjoyed this series. I would probably give this overall a 4-star rating. This was just a really fun time. I loved all the characters, especially Christian. I don't know, he just holds a very special place in my heart. And Lissa I really appreciate as well. Rose and Dimitri kind of frustrate me a lot throughout this series, but I just overall enjoyed it so much. Next series I want to talk about is actually a duology that I never thought I would actually read, because so many people were hyping this up on BookTube, and to be honest, it didn't really sound like a story or a series that I would love, but I ended up reading it because of a readathon that I was participating in, and that was like the group book. And so that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is a really, really interesting and kind of out there fantasy duology. The second book is called Muse of Nightmares. The first book centers around this man named Laszlo Strange, who is a junior librarian, and he has memories of this city that he knows as Weep, but he also, I think, suspects that it's known by another name, but he can't remember what that name is. And basically, this caravan of people from Weep show up because they need people to come help them kind of take their city back from something that is oppressing them. And so Laszlo takes the opportunity and goes with them back to Weep, and that's kind of how the whole story starts. This I overall really enjoyed. I remember giving both of these books 4 stars. For me, Laini Taylor's writing style just doesn't jive the most with me. I think it's a little too flowery, and I don't know, I feel like I had to put a considerable amount of effort to fully comprehend what was going on in this story most of the time, and that may make me sound like an idiot, and honestly I don't care. And I've heard some other people kind of say the same thing about Laini Taylor's writing style. If you're someone who absolutely adores fantasy novels, I think that you would enjoy this, and like I said, once I could fully comprehend what was going on, I really did love where the story was going. And I am glad that I read this duology, because this is still a series that I find myself thinking about every now and then, because the characters are so unique and the story is just so compelling and so different from most fantasy novels that I've read. Okay, next is a series that I absolutely fell in love with in 2019, and that is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. This is a series of 7 books, but you could also say 8 books because there is a bind-up of prequel novellas. And I feel like most of you guys know this series very well. It's very, very popular on BookTube, but essentially this is about an assassin named Selena Sardathian. This is definitely a European-inspired YA fantasy. So in this first book, there's definitely kind of like Game of Thrones vibes as well as Hunger Game vibes, because she is competing to become the king's champion, which is the king's assassin. But after this first book, the series just goes so far beyond that plot. It's just unfathomable, honestly. This has definitely become one of my favorite series of all time. I think overall, I would probably give this series like a 4.5, because while I enjoyed all of the books, there were a couple that I gave 5 stars, and then most of them I gave 4 stars, so I'm gonna kind of go in between and give it a 4.5. I do think that some of the books have pacing issues, and for me personally, there were some pretty complex things going on in this series that I really had to sort of take my time while reading it so that I could fully understand what was happening. But that may also be because I don't read the most fantasy, and so this is probably one of the most complex fantasy series I have ever read. This is a series that I also find myself thinking about a lot. I especially just loved all of the characters in this, and oh man, it was just such a ride from start to finish. You know, reading all 8 books, I just had such a fun time overall, and I know a lot of people don't really enjoy Sarah J. Maas or her writing style, but she just really works for me personally. All right, we just have 2 series left to talk about. The first one is the Renegades Trilogy by Marissa Meyer. This is another series that you guys have heard me talk about a lot recently because I just finished the last book called Supernova in December. So I discussed this both in my end of December wrap up as well as my best books of 2019 video, which I will also link above. Marissa Meyer is definitely one of my all-time favorite YA authors. I love her retellings especially, but this is the first book that I think she's ever written that was an original story, and I think for the most part she knocked it out of the park. As much as I enjoyed this series, there are some things throughout, especially this first book and Arch Enemies, that I think could have been done better. I think Marissa Meyer could have expanded on other plot points and kind of ignored other plot points, if that makes sense. But Supernova definitely made this series worthwhile for me. I adore the characters in this. That is hands down my favorite part of this trilogy, and I definitely recommend it. This is basically a superhero story, and this takes place in a city called Gatlin City, and we have the Renegades, which are like the superheroes of this world, world, and they are essentially the government as well. And then we have the anarchists, which are the super villains. And so we have Nova, who is an anarchist, and we have Adrian, who is a renegade. Nova basically infiltrates the renegades by going undercover and becoming one, and that's the basic plot of this. But yeah, this was just a fun time overall, and I do recommend it if you enjoy superhero stories. Okay, the last series I want to talk about is a trilogy by Cassandra Clare, and that is going to be the Dark Artificers Trilogy. So this is the first book, Lady Midnight, which I actually read in December of 2018, and then I read Lord of Shadows and Queen of Air and Darkness in January and February, I think, of 2019. So this whole Shadowhunters world is about these kind of hybrid humans, and they hunt demons. But there's also so many other creatures in this world. There's vampires, there's werewolves, there's fae. There's just a lot going on in this world for sure. And this is, I believe, the third full series of Cassandra Clare's. There's also the Mortal Instruments series and the Infernal Devices. The Infernal Devices is my personal favorite. This is basically a sequel series to the Mortal Instruments. It's kind of hard to explain these series in a succinct way, but I do enjoy Cassandra Clare's stories and her writing style. This was just a really solid series. I would probably give this series overall a 4-star rating. I did really enjoy it. And the next series that she's starting is called The Last Hours, and the first book of that, called Chain of Gold, is coming out in a couple of months. So I definitely pre-ordered a copy of it. I'm really looking forward to it because that is a sequel series to The Infernal Devices, which, like I said, is my personal favorite series of her whole Shadowhunter Chronicles. Okay guys, that is it for all of these series that I read and finished in 2019. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope that you would consider subscribing, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!